Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well wherever you are in the world. Once again, please stay safe, stay strong, take very good care of yourselves and your loved ones during this time. And my warmest regards to you, as always, my friends, as always. And I would like to continue with the question and answer video. So I want to thank all of you who have participated and submitted questions to me. I'm very flattered by the interest that you are expressing. And so with this, let us continue on with part 3. So I'm at the video comments section, and I'm just going in order here. So now I am at the question provided by Reece Gallagher. So Reece, hello my friend, and you ask, what's a genre or era in film you'd like to become more well-versed in? Let's see, so there are a number actually, and so I could, it might take too long to mention all of them, but maybe the one at the moment that I feel most, I'm not at all expert in, is the Marvel films. I haven't seen any except a couple or a few, and I don't know I don't have any, I know kind of what goes on because I've heard so much about them, but I haven't any expertise in them, and I don't own any of them and anything like that. So they have been mentioned a lot by a lot of people, of course, I think with good reason, but I don't, maybe one of these days I'll try to really take a deep dive into those films, but maybe when my son is a little bit older, because he has an interest in some of those characters already. But yeah, so that's probably the big one, at least in terms of recent films. And I think more generally, I've always mentioned that my exposure to recent releases is very, very poor, next to nil, because I can't watch all these new releases, and so I haven't seen a lot of new films even now that have been the subject of a lot of attention, awards-wise, etc., for the past year or so, 2 or 3 or more. So I'm also very, very bad when it comes to very, very recent releases. It's not like I don't go out to the movies at all, because I have seen recent releases in the theater. You know, for instance, before this whole world crisis outbreak broke out, the last films that I saw in a theater were The Irishman, which had a very special playing in a kind of small, very small sort of independent art house theater in Tokyo. And it wasn't a film per se, but it was I think it was a digital version of it that was projected on the screen, but it was still a beautiful projection, and the quality was quite good. So that was The Irishman. And also I saw The Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, in the theater with a very dear friend of mine who also lives in Tokyo, and he is a big Star Wars fan. And so those are the last things that I saw in the theater here. But that's the exception to the general state of things for me, which is also that I don't have a good enough grasp on new releases. And so when it comes to films like, for instance, I didn't see Parasite until very, very recently, and so that was also an interesting thing as well. But I'm glad I did. But I was very much behind everyone else when it came to that film, simply because I wasn't able to see it. Because the North American schedule is a little bit different than the Japanese film schedule, etc. And so and also just because of my own personal schedule, work and family, that it's almost impossible for me to go out to the movies and watch them as much as I used to when I was younger. So also, just generally speaking, new releases, I think I'd like to get more well-versed in. But anyway, thank you very much for your question. Next, we have Ben Mara. So hello, Ben. And you ask, how do you feel about the use of jump scares in films? In horror films, do you like them, or do you feel they are a lazy way of evoking scares? How do you feel about them appearing in non-horror films or otherwise unsuspecting places? I have no philosophical objection to jump scares in horror films or non-horror films for that matter. I think it's a perfectly legitimate technique to try to create a kind of effect on the viewers. And so I have nothing philosophically against the use of such techniques. Of course, there could be something to be said about how to get your audiences scared for a particular moment in your particular work. And sometimes a jump scare might do it, but there might be other techniques that also involve a certain level of technique, right? So it really depends on the context where the jump scare fits in and what the work is and the overall effect as well. For instance, just because a jump scare is in a particular film doesn't make that film automatically better or worse, in my opinion. But it's also evident that if a film over relies on jump scares, perhaps using it too much, it becomes a kind of cliche within the film, thus losing. It robs the technique of its initial effect, I think. The law of diminishing returns, I think, can be applied to the use of any technique in cinema, in particular a jump scare. So the more it's used, the less effective I think it becomes. If it's used sparingly, I think it becomes quite an effective tool indeed. I can think of a number of jump scares. I don't necessarily want to mention the titles specifically because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there are a number of jump scares in a number of horror films that I've seen that have been really effective from the 80s and 90s in particular. And there have been a number of jump scares in non-horror films, but sort of quasi-horror films from some directors that we know that have been also very effective. But anyway, Ben, thank you very much for your question. I really appreciate it. Next, we have a question from Jason Webster, who asks, favorite motion picture soundtracks and why? Okay, this is interesting. So I recently uploaded a video asking viewers for their favorite uses of music in cinema. And in that video, I did mention a couple of soundtracks that I thought were particularly moving to me. I mentioned Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, the Philip Glass score. I also made reference very briefly to Twin Peaks and I think others. And so, but if I could mention some others now, there are so many, too many to mention in one video and in one sitting, but I was recently reminded of, for example, the James Bond films, and in particular the scores by John Barry, the great John Barry. And so I was a big fan of the scores by John Barry, in particular the scores for the films From Russia with Love and On Her Majesty's Secret Service and The Living Daylights. Although I do also think that his score for example, A View to a Kill is brilliant. I also love Diamonds Are Forever. That score I think is really, really great. And also The Man with a Golden Gun, I think is just fantastic. But in particular, the three films that I mentioned first, which is From Russia with Love and On Her Majesty's Secret Service and The Living Daylights. I must say in particular for the film The Living Daylights, there's the use of a particular theme, which is, I think the title is called If There Was a Man. And that particular theme is then given some lyrics, and it's performed by the band The Pretenders. And so I really like the John Barry theme as it's used in the film. It's a sort of love theme. And also I really love the way that the Pretenders used it, sung it, If There Was a Man. It's a really tender moment in that particular film, which is, I think, a kind of underrated film in my opinion, The Living Daylights. I think it's actually one of my favorite James Bond films. I would actually put it in, if I had to rank them, it would definitely be in the top 5 for sure. But that's maybe for another video. But what was I saying? So yes, so The Living Daylights is great. Incidentally, I am a kind of fan of the new James Bond films, and I really love the Daniel Craig versions. One of my favorite James Bond films ever, in fact, is Casino Royale, which I think is just an utterly captivating, very, very clever, quite unique, and almost in terms of style and narrative thrust, very, very revolutionary in terms of the context of the Eon productions of James Bond. It's really quite dynamic in many aspects, and it holds up incredibly well. But one of the things I always liked in the John Barry era, if you will, was the fact that there would always be a kind of ballad, or there would always be a kind of love theme, and it wouldn't always be reliant on chords of a minor key, sort of suspenseful songs or chords of a minor key. And so I miss that. I miss having a theme song that was that was a ballad, and it was flowery and light and also very beautiful in a major key. For instance, You Only Live Twice comes to mind, or All Time High comes to mind, or I mentioned before, it's the side B, if you will, but it's the song If There Was a Man. I think it's really lovely, and so I miss those little moments in James Bond music, but I wish they could come back. Probably not, because I know that the commercial landscape of cinema and marketing these films is maybe changed over the course of the last 10, 20 years or so, but still, one of these days maybe it could return. Not to say anything inherently against the music for the current films, mind you, but it's just something that I noticed in the recent films. It would be, as I say, it would be nice if one day we could have a sort of a theme song in the major key instead of the minor key, because we've had plenty of songs in the minor key. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just going, just rambling here. So anyway, Jason, thank you very much for your question, and best regards. Next, we have a question from our dear friend LJLJ. So it's nice to see you as always, my dear friend. I hope you're well. It's been a great pleasure knowing you over this past several months, I think. Maybe a year or so, perhaps. Feels much longer, but it's always nice to hear from you, my dear friend. And you say, or you ask, what is a film you thought was good, but the ending felt lackluster or maybe displeased? And have you seen the film Nymphomaniac? It felt kind of like Salo, not entertaining but honest. Appreciate it for its honest portrayal, like Salo. So to answer your second question first, yes, I have seen Nymphomaniac, and I think it's quite it's a very confrontational work, but I don't think that's necessarily a negative against the film. There's a lot to say about that film. And you asked, what is a film that you thought was good, but the ending felt lackluster or maybe displeased? There are a number of films that I've seen where perhaps I wasn't necessarily taken with the ending or how it concluded, or maybe I was left feeling bewildered by how it ended. And so there are a number of titles like that, but if you want a list or something, I could certainly let you know. I hope you're not offended, but probably I'll just forego just mentioning any specific titles now, because I don't want to spoil any film for anyone who hasn't seen it. So, but just know that there are a number of films, even films that I've seen recently, in fact, where I've been a little bit, I was sort of into it, but then by the end of the film, or maybe starting a little bit before, sort of going like this and what's going on here, I'm not sure. But there are films like that, of course, that I've come across. So if you want to know more, please let me know. You can send me a private message, and we can talk further about that, my friend. But great question, really great question, my friend. So thank you so much, and please continue to be well. And next is, let's see, Nathan Phillips. Daisuke, if you've addressed this already in a previous video, I apologize. I'm still making my way through your channel, but I wondered if you could talk about Criterion's VHS releases and your collection of those, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. And again, if this is some somewhere in your archive and I missed it so far. Sorry about that. Oh, thank you very much for asking. So let's see. I was actually, yeah, here it is. So I don't have a video going through the Criterion VHS copies that I have, but I can certainly do that in the future. I'm not sure exactly when I'll be able to do it, but I can certainly try. Again, I can't make any promises, but just because of my schedule. But if I'm able to do it, I'd certainly be willing to. So, for instance, here is one of the VHSs that I have, and this is the VHS of The Third Man. This is used, of course, and I got this in used condition, so it has a sticker here, which has been affixed, and unfortunately I don't want to take it off lest I destroy the print in behind there. But this is The Third Man. There's actually another version of this which I have as well, but I'll probably leave, and the VHS tape is housed in there like that, with the essay starting here and then ending in the inside flap, which is an interesting thing. It mirrors the Laserdisc release of this, if you recall. And there's a little thing in the corner here which says $39.95. So interesting, when this was being sold, this was being offered at the price of $39.95, VHS Hi-Fi. So yeah, so this is just an example, but yeah, I mean, again, if you don't mind having to wait, if that's the case, and with the understanding that I'm not sure if or when I'd be able to get to it, but I can certainly give it a try, and I will certainly consider it if that's okay with you. I don't have all of the VHS releases. I have most of them. What is it? I have, as far as I understand it, there were a number, and there could be more that I'm just not aware of, because, as you know, VHS releases from the Criterion Collection are very, very few and far between. And so it was something that, as far as there was also different associated labels, of course, that were associated with Janus films and things like that. But in terms of the Criterion Collection VHS releases, there were very few of them, and I have most of them, but not all of them. There are a couple that have eluded me over the years, and it's a little bit difficult also because I'm in Tokyo, and so it's almost impossible for me to do a search for them here in Japan. I have to go elsewhere, in another country, for instance, and that's usually pretty much impossible for me. So I just have to rely on online sources and things like that. But so I guess I'm now even still very casually on the lookout, but I can show you certainly what I have in a video. Again, I don't know when or if I'd be able to do it, but I'll certainly keep it in mind. But anyway, thank you very much for your interest, Nathan, and best regards. Next is, oh, great, Dinobot Kiryu is here, and you have a number of questions. So let's see if we can go through this. So the first one is there a horror film that really scared you? I personally found Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead, 1978, and The Ring disturbing the first time I saw them in my early teens. That's very interesting. I think the film that I think is I don't know if it's the most disturbing, but it's certainly one of the most disturbing films that I've seen, is The Vanishing, and I'll leave it at that. So anyone who hasn't seen The Vanishing, don't read about it, just watch it. Don't read any synopsis or read any reviews of the film The Vanishing. That's a film that is utterly dependent on not knowing anything before watching it. So but there's The Vanishing, and maybe another film, The Exorcist. It was kind of disturbing, but I would say the one that really got to me, because of my age, the time I saw it, was The Exorcist 3. That one really got to me. And if we're talking about something that really scared me that isn't a horror film per se, there is the film called Superman 3. Superman 3 with Christopher Reeve and Robert Vaughn and Richard Pryor, and there's a particular scene in that film that is very, very scary. I saw it when I was a kid, and I've never been able to shake it from my mind. Superman 3. I know it's not meant to be a horror film, but it really traumatized me as a kid, and I think many other kids as well that were in my same generation. But there's that. So, and you have another question, which is, what are things you think the Heisei and Millennium Godzilla films brought to the series you liked or welcomed? You say, I for one really like the new elements from the films Godzilla vs. Biollante, etc. In their music, characters, and monster designs and battles. And you also mentioned the updated. Okay, great. So what are things you like about the Heisei and Millennium Godzilla films? So, I think what I like is I like the updated monster designs. I think they're really cool and neat, and I think that in particular I like the updated monster designs for the Heisei series. Nothing necessarily against the Millennium series in terms of design, but I think there's a certain quaintness and almost cute factor which I really appreciate in the Heisei series, especially as the series progressed up to Dystoria. So that's one thing I really appreciated, and also I liked how for instance, the Heisei series was really trying to create a kind of continuity, a kind of lived-in universe, and so there was a sort of attempt to create a continuity from film to film to film. That's not to say that there wasn't any sense of continuity among the Showa era films. There certainly was, but I feel it's more integrated in the Heisei series, which I really appreciated. And on the opposite side of that coin, I really loved how the Millennium series really tried to go the opposite direction, with a couple of exceptions, of course, but it went sort of the opposite directions in terms of not necessarily creating one integrated continuity per se, except for a few exceptions, as I mentioned. But there was a sense of trying to acknowledge that there was a sort of maybe almost kind of an alternate reality basis for the entire series, which I thought was pretty interesting. And you didn't mention the Reiwa era, but I guess we could also mention Reiwa, which I understand includes Shin Godzilla. It's not really a Reiwa film, but we've seen this in past, Godzilla 1984 or 1985 Godzilla isn't really Heisei, but I think it's considered to be Heisei. But in any event, what was I saying? So yes, so Shin Godzilla and also the anime films that followed, I think, are quite brilliant in terms of design. I like how they really developed the design work, made certain twists onto the monster design, which I thought was really fantastic. And your question next is favorite movie by James Cameron. If you've answered questions like mine in other videos you've done, I apologize. I'm kind of new to your channel. Oh, not at all. So I haven't mentioned James Cameron on this channel. There is a great podcast and a YouTube channel called Eddie Green's 101. Eddie Green's 101, and I was a guest on a podcast that he did, which is still ongoing. It's great, and you should check out the YouTube channel Eddie Green's 101 if you haven't already. But the topic of discussion on that podcast was James Cameron films. And so we had a great discussion. At least I think we did. It was really fun for me. And I think James Cameron films, what are my favorite ones? I do have a few. Probably maybe Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and Aliens. And I've grown to really admire the film Titanic over the years. I didn't necessarily like it at first, but as I said, I've grown to really like that film very much now. And also the original, the Terminator, is really a very scary, almost horror film, which is, and it's kind of a grungy, low-budget masterpiece. So, but I have a great admiration for the works of James Cameron. I haven't spoken about his films that much. I did speak about a movie theater experience I had when I was a kid, watching Titanic for the first time. So if maybe it's somewhere in, I don't know exactly what video it was, but I did see Titanic in the movie theater. Anyway, but thank you very much for your great questions. They're really wonderful. Next is DJ Spoon Goon asks, what is the worst film you have ever seen? I might have addressed this in a previous comment, but I think don't know if it's the worst film, but one of the films I was really, really disappointed by, I couldn't engage with, is the film Giallo, Argento's Giallo. I love Argento, and I know that there are many circumstances behind that film, perhaps that were beyond Argento's control, and I know that many of the cast and crew really worked hard on that film, but I just really, I have trouble getting to it, if you know what I mean. But thank you for your question. Let's see, next is Matthew Scarinci. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing. But Matthew, you ask, you recently spoke about how much you love Neon Genesis Evangelion. Excuse me. Oops. Here we go. Whoops. Sorry about this. You recently spoke about how much you love Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'm wondering if, aside from that and Akira, what anime series or films do you feel are masterpieces along with those? Also, I know time is already tight, but a film club video on Evangelion or End of Evangelion would be a dream. Yes, so thank you very much for that. And I guess just to talk about the film club, I'd love to, but I don't know if I can fit it into the schedule and think, but I'd love to talk about Evangelion one day, even if not a film club, even just in a brief video. I'm a big fan of that series, and in particular, End of Evangelion is, wow. Gosh, I wish, I wish that I could turn back time, because now the guilt is all mine. Oh gosh, that moment, that's quite a moment. It all turns to nothing. It all comes tumbling down. Yes, so, but anyway, I'm sorry. As far as other anime films, I'm not an expert in anime, but if I know many people have already mentioned, for instance, the film Ghost in the Shell, which I join in that chorus. But if you're also interested in an Oshii film that's really quite fascinating, I would recommend Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, which is really one of the most complicated, complex, and fundamentally manga anime changing films that I've seen. It's really quite deep and very fun. The Urusei Yatsura series, the Rumiko Takahashi series, it's very popular even now. You can sometimes see it here on Rerun, but that film, Urusei Yatsura 2, Beautiful Dreamer, is really one of the best. So I'd recommend that. There are many others, but that would be an example. Okay, so with that, my friends, let me end it there. And I will continue to work through these, but I hope that you are well, and I'm sorry if I hope my answers were okay. If not, I really apologize, but I hope you can understand. And with that, please continue to be well, and please stay tuned to this channel. I will continue to make Q&A videos answering as many questions as I can. But until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please continue to watch a lot of great movies. Let me say that again. Please continue to watch a lot of great movies. Thank you once again for your time, and cheers.